I see a story like this, and I am reminded constantly that we are not only one nation under blackmail, as Whitney Webb likes to say, but we're also being played for fools by the military industrial complex. So if you can set up this entire situation that just happened with a National Guard member getting shot down in Washington, D.C. by a person who worked for the CIA, if you ask me, that's where the story begins and that's where the story ends. But I'm sure there's more to it and would love to hear your thoughts.
I believe that there's certainly much more to it, but it's actually a story that I think would not surprise the average American at this point. I think that on the day of the breaking news, there were quite a few concerning aspects that I certainly paid attention to, that I'm sure most other people caught as well, but also in the days leading up to the incident on November 26th. And let's not any confusion about when this happened, the day before Thanksgiving. There's so many pieces to this that when you start to outline this in a classic Venn diagram, you see that so many of these aspects come together that paint a picture that you look at it and you're like, yeah, there might be something to that. So let's look at the victims of this horrible day. You have a 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom. She's deceased. West Virginia National Guard, recently deployed to this mission. She was not on the DC mission the entire deployment. And to understand about the mobilization of National Guard into a federalized operation like this in DC and how they're utilized, they're on a rotation. So it's not like they deploy one single brigade or battalion and that stays through the duration. They rotate because they're state's guardsmen and they're controlled by the adjutant general of their respective state, in this case West Virginia. So proximity wise, West Virginia is probably a good option. They maintain a high state of readiness. They're usually pretty rotationally active National Guard unit, so that makes sense. And then you have 24-year-old Andrew Wolf, also from West Virginia, as far as we know right now, still in critical condition, fighting for his life. So those are the two National Guardsmen that were on duty that day. And then we have, of course, the alleged shooter, 29-year-old Afghan national, Rahmanullah Lakanwal. 29 years old. This guy is not what you would picture as this hardened Taliban fighter that snuck his way onto the plane coming back from Afghanistan during Operation Allies Refuge, which when we brought 190,000 Afghan nationals to the United States on special visas for protection because they had worked with U.S. forces, either in a very close capacity as translators or asylum seekers, or those select few that worked hand in hand with elite units and the CIA in our zero units or National Strike Force units. This individual worked in an organization under those units called the Scorpion Force. They had a lot of vetting. These are not people that were just put on a plane, flown into Dulles and said, go live your life. There was immense vetting, probably more vetting than most naturalized or long-term dual citizens, probably more vetting than someone that has a dual citizenship with Israel, to be fair. So they went through a lot of vetting to get here. This individual was one of those, worked with the CIA. The CIA doesn't just lose contact with its previous assets. Just, they're in the US now, that operation is over. The CIA has been operating in Afghanistan for a long time. This is not new. We know this. All the way back to the 1980s in Operation Cyclone, when the CIA was on the ground working with the Mujahideen and maintained contacts with some of those individuals all the way into 2001 when we first got on the ground. So they maintain these relationships. Let's not overlook that. This is not a coincidence, random guy. Now let's look at where he came from, the shooter. He came from Washington State, not Washington, D.C., not living down the street just looking for someone to shoot because he was disgruntled. He came across the country. He drove from Washington State all the way to D.C. Why? Why? So as you ask the questions and you look at the why, that's kind of like the first Venn diagram. All these facts that I just laid out, which are facts, those are not up for debate. Those are all facts. A big why. And then you look at the on the day that it happened, almost immediately you have the president of the United States sending out this visceral hate speech, unhinged tweet of this person will pay to the extreme. And then a few minutes later, maybe an hour or so, but not long later, the president tweets, both of the National Guardsmen are dead, deceased.
So what is the motivation I think is the big question.
Yeah, I think the motivation is, I premise this with my position in that I do not trust this government. I do not trust the president. I do not trust Double Strike Pete. I do not trust Little Marco. I do not trust the cabinet. I do not trust this government. So in asking the why and the motivation behind it, I believe that this is not some grand conspiracy. This is a continuation of a CIA operation to stoke division, to stoke unrest, to do a self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh, look at the crime in DC. Look, we have to bring in more people. And now the president just directed Double Tap Pete to bring in 500 more. Again, a judge recently said that the deployment of these troops to DC is already considered illegal, and now he's going to bring 500 more. It's a red flag. It's a precursor to unrest, martial law, total control, and where better to start it than in the Capitol. Why I think that is because, one, where the shooter came from, Lochinwall. This guy wasn't just lost in society. I guarantee that the CIA knew his location and activities at all times. He was a former asset in a very elite unit. Two, a week before, one whole week before the shooting, Lochinwall's name spiked in Google searches. Why? A random Afghan living out in Washington State? Why? And then the day before the shooting, a very big noticeable spike in searches on his name. But what's even more concerning to that is that 4 days prior to the shooting, in Tel Aviv, the name of Sarah Beckstrom spiked in Google search. Why? A 20-year-old from West Virginia? Who in Tel Aviv would know her? So when you start looking at all these pieces together, this is not a coincidence. This was not a random anger shooting. This was not a what Kash Patel and Governor Bowser had said before. This was within minutes of after the shooting. This was targeted. This was planned. And I think that President Trump is probably clueless. I don't think he gets, I think they leave him out of it. There are other forces in control now.
Yeah,
is what I think.
Yeah, I don't see him getting intelligence briefings either. And if he is getting them, he's getting them from people that are systematically cutting him out from the actual decision-making that's going on within the government. When you had Biden in the White House, you didn't need to worry about that because he wasn't there to begin with. I always called him President Blinken for a reason. He was the one running the country because it sure as hell wasn't Kamala Harris either. So in this case, I think you have a president who is clearly not only on the outs, but I think it is fair to say that he's not all there anymore. I think if we're being completely honest and objective about the current state of the president, I think it's, again, I'm not a doctor. I am not going to pretend that I know for sure what his deal is. But the way that he has been responding in the media in general leaves a lot to be desired in terms of his disposition. But in addition to that, he's also somebody who, based on the answers he's giving, sounds like somebody who at a time thought he was in control of everything, or at least in his own mind. That's what he thought. As it turns out, he's not only not in control, but I also think that he's getting extremely frustrated with not being able to be in control. You see, this is also what ends up happening in terms of the long run. You know, they say, you know, once a Marine, always a Marine, once in the CIA, always in the CIA. Well, once you're a part of the Zionist money machine, it's basically like being in La Cosa Nostra. There is only one way you're leaving. Well, actually, there's two. It will be via death, and either it will be by choice or by force. And in the case of Mr. Trump, I do believe that he's in a situation now where it's beyond being in a lame duck. I think he is at a crossroads of his entire life. And I'm going to show this to you now as I'm going to show the audience. I don't know how many people saw this interview or this press conference that he gave, but let's just say that his answers and the way he answers them leads one to believe that not only is he not in the loop, but his mind is clearly going places that he's probably never going to come back from.
Question about this tragic shooting in Washington, D.C. U.S. officials say that the suspect worked very closely with the CIA in Afghanistan for years, that he was vetted, and the vetting came up clean.
He went cuckoo. I mean,
even if that's the case, the fact that I am listening to a reporter in the Oval saying this shooter that you're trying to pin this whole latest false flag on, you are admitting and acknowledging that he's intelligence, that he's part of the CIA. So why would anyone believe anything other than this is a clandestine operation that you didn't keep under wraps? You were not supposed to see the IDF or American soldiers shooting Palestinian children. You were not supposed to see that. And I am, by the grace of God, you are here today. And you know what? There's probably a couple of people that now that the cat's out of the bag about what really went on in DC, now they have to be watching their back. What the fuck is going to happen to them? They weren't supposed to know about this, and somebody clearly leaked it that this guy is part of the CIA. But the way that Trump responds to this is even more interesting.
and he went nuts. And that happens, too. It happens too often with these people. You see them. But look, this is how they come in. This is how they're standing on top of each other, and that's an airplane. There was no vetting or anything. They came in unvetted. And we have a lot of others in this country. We're going to get them out. But they go cuckoo. Something happens to them.
Your DOJ IG just reported this year that there was thorough vetting by DHS and by the FBI of these Afghans who were brought into the U.S. So why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let them in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here, and you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person.
I think the president, like a lot of people who start to lose their mind, this is a clear example of how somebody with dementia starts to behave. I know what I'm talking about. You're wrong. You're a stupid person to ask such a question. Why are you getting so frustrated? The person asked a completely legitimate question. He's saying that this guy was clearly vetted. So why are you getting upset, Mr. President? Well, you're really stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. Believe me when I tell you, I'm the smartest person alive, and that's never going to change, and nothing gets over my head. Well, I would imagine from your perspective, Mr. Special Forces, that quite a few things are getting over this man's head. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think that as you described just now, I agree with all that. He's unhinged. He's not well. And then when you take someone who has a narcissistic, domineering personality, and you couple that with losing control of oneself, because he's losing control of his faculties. That's just, I mean, he's 80 years old. I mean, by the time he finishes his term, he'll be 80, on the verge of 83. It's like, come on. So he's losing his faculties. I think there's probably, some signs of dementia. He's not associating what's being said to what he's responding with, because you're right. That reporter asked a very logical, rational, good question. And as you noted in his answer, he didn't say, oh, no, that's not true, or, oh, that's not verified. He was like, Yeah, he was, and then he just went crazy. The guy didn't go crazy. He was a CIA asset who was activated. And if you notice now, he's not dead. He's still alive. I believe there was probably some type of exchange made with this guy because he was maintained as a CIA asset that he does this, and in exchange, there's going to be some agreement to get the rest of his family out because the rest of his family probably did not make it out of Afghanistan, or some type of deal was made. Now, you can't foresee what would happen. The National Guardsmen that responded and eliminated the threat didn't kill him, but wounded him severely. Maybe didn't account for that aspect of it, but he's still alive. So I think there was some type of deal that was made in exchange for him doing this. And they probably leave Trump out of all these conversations because he cannot be trusted with information. I think we can all agree with that Donald Trump cannot be trusted with classified information. He'll either tweet it or leave it in the bathroom.
Yeah, for better or worse, he's actually somebody who doesn't mind informing the American people about things that, frankly, they should have the right to know, but the powers that be do not want them to know. Because if the people know, then they're going to rebel. That's the whole point. This whole empire is shaking at its foundation. And as Jen has always said, he was going to facilitate the revolution just by getting in the first time. Now that he got in again with a gap term, forget it. It's inevitable, which is why I'm sure he is concerned that he might get taken out. So let's finish this out and we'll continue.
And there's a law passed that it's almost impossible not to get them out. You can't get them out once they come in. And they came in, and they were unvetted, they were unchecked, there were many of them, and they came in on big planes, and it was disgraceful. And if you look, you'll see there was a law passed. It makes it almost impossible not to let them in, not to certify them, so to speak, once they come in. And they came in, and they shouldn't have come in. And frankly, the whole thing was a mess. The whole Afghanistan situation was a mess. It should have never taken place. If we're going to go out, and we would have gone out because I had everybody ready to go. We were going to go out with strength and dignity and precision. And we would have left from Bagram, and we would have kept Bagram, by the way, because of its very close relationship to China and where they make their missiles. But when you let the people come in by the thousands and thousands and thousands, they made a terrible mistake.
No, the mistake here, which is what he will not say, which is what anyone who is concerned about their safety probably is not willing to say, is that the reason why we have a very, very shaky border policy, immigration policy, to say the least, is because multinational corporations and the richest people on this planet are who actually control this country. And in greater numbers, whether they become those that completely buy off the government. When Miriam Adelson gave Trump $100 million, she didn't give him $100 million to go and win a presidential election. She gave him $100 million because she was confident he was going to win, and then he would do her bidding. And boy, oh boy, has he ever. And boy, oh boy, is it only going to get worse. And boy, oh boy, does that look like an old man. And boy, oh boy, does it look like a vice president who is very eager to become the president at some point. Frankly, more often than not, you don't even know a vice president exists. We didn't really know a vice president existed and haven't known a vice president to exist since Dick Cheney. And the only reason things got so bad is because Bush always did what he was told, because he knew that if some bureaucrat like Cheney ever made it to the White House, yeah, the United States probably would have gone down at the head at that time, almost 25 years ago. But today, we are facing a very dangerous situation in which I believe the empire is shaking at its foundation. And so we really don't know which way it's going. But what we do know is that these false flag operations, they're not going to stop. That's the scary part. If this doesn't convince people to get riled up about supporting Israel, extending the war powers into other parts of the Middle East or Europe, or dare I say Southeast Asia, they'll just come up with something else, and something much more volatile and dangerous. That's my fear. What do you think?
I agree. It doesn't stop until until it's addressed and until it's called out and the people call it out to recognize it, to where you're not fooling us anymore. Without that check on power and that calling them out, they will continue. This will continue until it gets to that point of what the empire is trying to achieve with this. And I personally believe it is civil unrest and division within the nation. I think that the CIA and Mossad are actually, are quite deeply integrated, and that, the CIA is like a revolving door for corporations, people going in and out of that run the country and corporations and industry. And I think that they're looking for a change. And I think that Trump is on, Trump is not a viable candidate for the future of their leader of their empire. He's falling apart. I mean, I used to be really concerned about him, doing everything he could to try to manipulate the system to get a third term, but I don't think he'll survive third term. So I'm not really worried about it.